All right, welcome everyone to today's URU Town Hall on work-based learning. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who don't know me already, I'm Julia Michaels. I'm Director of Development and Strategic Partnerships for URU. Today's topic is important and timely. We know that today's undergraduates expect and deserve strong preparation for their future careers, and this has to take place across the student's journey, both inside and outside of the classroom. And it has to be accessible to all students. This was an important thread in the Boyer 2030 report and the recommendations from the Boyer 2030 Commission. And URU is about to launch two communities on world readiness and high impact practices that will begin to engage on these issues and others. So more about those communities later. But today we're going to talk about work integrated learning and unpack some of the data on how different types of work integrated learning strategies and practices enhance student outcomes. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by two experts from Strada, Nichole Torpey-Saboe, Vice President for Research at Strada, and Kevin Grubb, Vice President for Work-Based Learning. They're going to share some of their research findings with you, and then towards the end, we'll have time for a generative discussion about what we learn. So feel free to put questions in the chat or the Q&A box as we go. There will also be a few moments throughout Kevin and Nichole's presentation where we'll pause for questions. So everyone is in the Zoom meeting, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you if you want to join in and speak as well. And of course, there'll be opportunities to speak during the audience Q&A, like most of our URU town halls. But for now, I will give Nichole and Kevin the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We are just thrilled to be with you all. We're really looking forward to the discussion part of this session, so definitely be prepared with any kind of questions or things that you would like to discuss. We're going to kick it off with probably about 10 to 15 minutes worth of research on my part, and then Kevin's going to get into practices and also intersperse that with some discussion. So there are two different research reports that I'm going to share some findings with you. First, just to start off, as Julia said, I'm Vice President for Research at Strada Education Foundation. We are a national nonprofit focused on connecting education with opportunity. So what does that mean? We think of it as, if there's a continuum of organizations working on college access, and then that movement has kind of shifted to college completion because access alone is not enough. And then we are really focused on not only college completion, but for what? What is the career aspirations that students have, and how are we ensuring that education is leading them to be able to achieve those goals, economic mobility, career satisfaction, all of these things. So that's where Strada focuses. And as I said, there's two different research reports that we've done in the past year focused on work-based learning. So one came out last summer, and this was called the National Survey of Work-Based Learning. We actually co-developed it with some researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, their Center for College Workforce Transitions. They've had a long expertise in this field. And we were looking at students' experiences with a wide range of work-based learning types, because prior to this, we'd really been focused on internships and, hearing more and more from the field, well, internships alone doesn't cover the landscape. So how can we understand the breadth of experience that students have, both with internships as well as things like practica, student teaching, clinicals, undergraduate research, project-based learning. We actually had a couple of other types on here as well: co-ops, micro internships, and service learning. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough responses from students who had actually participated in those to be able to share those results in this survey, although we do in another survey that's the second one I'm going to share with you. So this was looking at seniors enrolled at public four-year institutions, and we asked them about their participation in all of these different types of work-based learning. And we asked them also about their perceptions of the degree to which their experience made them a stronger candidate for the kind of job that they want. So that was on a 1 to 10 scale, that rating. And so what we found here is that although paid internships definitely did come out as the strongest, there were several experiences that students rate really highly in terms of their career preparation. So undergraduate research also rated very highly, 8 out of 10, practicum, So that's student teaching, clinical, rated 8 out of 10. You see undergrad or unpaid internships a little bit lower. Project-based learning still strong, just a little bit lower. And then even these on-campus jobs and off-campus jobs, we don't always think of those as work-based learning, but that's an area where we're really interested in understanding more. Are there ways? An average of 6.5 means that some students rated that a 10. Some students probably rated it a 2. And so there's a lot of variation within that. And, where are there experiences that are not always classified as work-based learning, but are delivering those kinds of good career preparation for students? So then we dug a little deeper because we asked about a lot of different dimensions. It's actually quite a long survey. You're just going to see just a couple snippets from this. But what we found in terms of the predictors of a student saying that the experience made them a stronger job candidate were really two dimensions. So it was the extent to which they felt they developed technical skills during the experience, and the extent to which they felt that that experience expanded their professional network. So kind of both the technical and the social capital, the human side, were both strong predictors of a work-based learning experience that students felt made them a stronger job candidate. And so when we map those two dimensions onto each of the different kinds of work-based learning experiences, you can kind of get a picture of where all these different ones fall. So again, we see paid internships being quite strong for most students across both practica being also very strong. Unpaid internships up there, undergraduate research. The interesting thing we find about project-based learning is that students tend to rate that quite highly in terms of the skills they develop, but not very highly in terms of expanding their professional network, which I think makes sense if this is something that's primarily taking place within a course, that, it may be lacking in terms of that professional network dimension. And so that's where we have to think of, maybe it's on a continuum, maybe that's a first step or kind of a starting line to prepare them for a richer, more intensive experience, such as an internship or a practica experience where they might be able to also get the benefits of expanding their professional network as well. So that was our exploration of all these different kinds. And from there, we boiled down to if we want to give states and institutions a look at how they're doing on providing these kinds of experiences or making sure that these kinds of experiences are accessible to their students, we wanted to provide a benchmark for that. And so this is part of our State Opportunity Index work. Some of you may be familiar with this. We publish state ratings on actually work-based learning is one of 5 different dimensions that we publish that are all about connecting education to career. And for that work, we look at these 5 kinds of work-based learning. So we're focused on paid experiences because if we're trying to, the idea for this is to set an aspirational benchmark for states to aim for to get every student one of these experiences. So for that aspirational benchmark, we definitely want to focus on pay so that it's more accessible to every student, including students that, need to be earning money to support themselves in school. And we look at internships, apprenticeships, co-ops, practica, which includes student teaching and clinicals, and undergraduate research experience. So that was based on both our research as well as a body of evidence in the field in terms of which kinds of opportunities have been strongly linked to better career outcomes. So again, not saying, something like project-based learning, we see it as very valuable, but yet doesn't yet have the proof that it improves those post-completion outcomes. So when we're really looking at, that highest aspirational benchmark, these are the kinds of experiences that we're focused on. Now, in that report, we look state by state. If you go and look it up, you can see state by state maps. The short version of it is that most states are in what we would consider a developing stage. So that's fewer than half of their students are having one of these kinds of experiences before they graduate. There are a couple states that are a little bit above that. So Iowa and Pennsylvania right now are in what we would consider an advanced stage. They have more than 50% of their students. And there's a lot of students or a lot of states, excuse me, mostly in the upper Midwest that are on the border kind of between that developing an advanced stage. And that's something that we're continuing to track. We'll have a new report out in October. If your institution wants to be part of it, follow up with me because you can be part of it and it's free and we don't reveal any institution specific data. It's all rolled up at the state level. But what I did want to share just a little bit more about what we're finding nationally in terms of participation in these experiences. So we have a few different cuts of this data. The first thing is that there is huge variation by field of study. This is probably not surprising to most of you on this call, but we see, for example, engineering and business students are far more likely to have one of these paid experiences compared to other majors. What you can see here, that dark green, that's the percentage of students who had a paid experience. When you look at the gray part of the bar, that's when you include paid and unpaid. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, for example, you look at education majors, you know, about the same percentage of education majors are having a work-based learning experience compared to engineering students, but nearly all engineering students are paid and very few education students are paid for their work-based learning experience, for instance. When we look at this across demographic groups, what we see is that first generation students and women are much less likely to have a paid quality work-based learning experience compared to their peers. And some of that has to do with field of study and some of it is independent of that. So when we look at this by gender, what we find is that majors that are more traditionally female, such as education and health professions. So if you look on the left-hand side of the slide, that shows you the gender composition of each of these majors. So in engineering, 27% of students are female, 71% are male, for instance. In education, it's flipped. 76% are female, 23% are male. And so we see that within those majors, if you look on the right, participation in paid quality work-based learning experience is pretty similar across female and male students. And so it's not really a difference in terms of I guess within those majors, we see a lot of parity. But what is different is that in fields that tend to have much higher participation by female students, they tend to not be paid. So that's where the the disproportionate impact comes in. When we look at first generation, what we see is it's actually even within field of study, we see differences. So here you can see on the right-hand side, this is participation in paid quality work-based learning experiences by major for first generation students. So these are students who are the first in their families to attend college. Their parents don't have a college degree. They are less likely to have a paid quality work-based learning experience no matter what their major is. A little exception there at the bottom with education, but pretty much for every other field, they're less likely to have one of these experiences. Then another thing that we find is that institution type and specifically institutional resources also seem to play a role. So when we look at institutions that have higher endowments, we also see more students participating in paid work-based learning. You can see that we just split it, above the median and below the median in our sample for endowment. And you can see there's about a 15 percentage point difference for participation in work-based learning across those institutions with more resources compared to fewer. And then finally, when we look at that by major, again, we see those higher resourced institutions. Students are more likely to have a work-based learning experience, a paid work-based learning experience in every major at wealthier institutions, institutions with higher endowment. So when we, this is actually, I should have mentioned, these are not published yet. This is a forthcoming report that we're working on. And the aim will be, I think, to shed light both for institutional leaders on how they might think about targeting work-based learning experiences, as well as for policymakers if they're thinking about, which students and institutions might need more support, that this can kind of focus us on not only expanding the number of work-based learning experiences, but thinking about who is not getting them. So we're not, getting some students their fifth internship. We're more focused on getting more students their first internship and their first opportunity. Very last slide on this is just the connection between coaching and advising and work-based learning. So we didn't get into what we call quality coaching. It's another dimension of State Opportunity Index project, but it's really focused on that career guidance and advising. And the takeaway here is that students who have guidance, labor market information, support to make a plan, they're also more likely to have a paid quality work-based learning experience. So these things kind of go together. And that's an important way that you can increase access for students. So I'm going to just put that page up in case people are interested in learning more. You can, find our full report, our state reports, geek out on our methodology if that's your cup of tea. But I will pause to take any questions, and maybe Kevin or Julia, if you see some that are in the chat, if you can let me know, because I've got my slides up, so I can't see those
Well,
very easily.
there is actually a substantive question on, does higher endowment correlate with schools who have engineering and business programs? Is that something that you looked at?
Oh, that is really interesting. We haven't looked at that yet. Um, so that's a good question. And I'm not sure.
And also, what is the definition of quality coaching?
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. We have This is also student reported their experiences, and there's three different dimensions. We ask about if they had personalized guidance to help them choose a education to career path. We ask about the kinds of information that they got about career paths that fit their skills, job opportunities, wages, and if they got that information within their first year, because we're really this this whole thing was actually developed. If anybody is familiar with the National Institute for Student Success out of Georgia State, we work closely with Tim Rennick and his team to develop these measures. And one of his key points is, this has to be early information so that it's timely for students. And then lastly, if they have support to make a plan and to overcome barriers and challenges that they face. So there's more information, including the exact survey items, but it's those kind of three dimensions of timely labor market information, support, and guidance for students.
I want to acknowledge Gabriella's really important question on first-gen student participation, but perhaps put a pin in it for the discussion that's going to follow. Kevin, do you want to go ahead and we'll turn to you and your part of the presentation.
Sure thing. Happy to do that. Thank you all for the great questions already in the chat. These are some good things for us to dive into further. So we always learn when we're out there talking with folks. So my part of the presentation will be a little bit more about some of the how institutions scale and create more access to work-based learning. And I want to caveat this by saying that we don't exactly know how. There's lots of different ways how. There's not like here's the formula and the playbook. But I have the great fortune of working on the work-based learning team at Strada and hearing a lot from folks who are trying this and the things that they are doing to put infrastructure together to scale work-based learning. So what I'll be doing is giving you some of the practices and things that we're seeing out there in the field, and giving you some of the high level of what it is, and then a few examples that we're seeing come to life. And then we have some questions for reflection and discussion based on sort of a package of each of those kinds of things. So I'm not going to do much more preamble. You'll feel it when we get into it, but certainly we are going to have some pausing here for reflection and questions, or even like you might want to raise your hand and say, hey, we're doing this thing that you didn't even mention, Kevin, or we're doing the thing you did mention, and here's how it's working for us, which we'd love to hear about, not only for us, but hopefully for our colleagues who are with us on this webinar. So the first sort of category of things that I'll talk about in terms of what institutions are doing to scale work-based learning, I'd put it under really specifically the category of infrastructure, and thinking about this in a few different ways. Who's the leader? How are we tracking this? And how are we defining it? Really are the main buckets. The first one, I think probably for many folks might seem fairly obvious and necessary to do, but it is, something that people are figuring out how to do, which is appointing a senior leader to really be in charge of and be accountable for whatever that goal might be, to scale work-based learning. And thinking about this very cross-functionally. So, and even some of the data you're seeing, we're thinking about different types of students, different disciplines. We're thinking about financial barriers. We're thinking about courses and registration. So this effort to scale this would really touch a lot of different divisions of an institution. So having someone who can have some of that cross-pollination, that cross-divisional authority or collaboration in place, is a critical one. The second item, which feels the least glamorous of them all, I would probably say, is having a definition of what work-based learning is. That's common across the institution. And what I think a thing that we see or hear a lot is a lot of enthusiasm and energy to make more work-based learning happen. And then sometimes going back to, but what does it mean? Or does everybody think it's the same thing that we're talking about here when we say we're going to scale work-based learning? Or which practices within work-based learning we're going to talk about? And thinking about what really counts to us, quote unquote, what's really measured within that sort of definition and goal. And then the last 2 points here are around developing a way to track that you are hitting or not hitting that goal, having ways to measure the participation in work-based learning, which for many institutions are things like embedded course codes across your student information systems and course registration systems. Some folks are experimenting with 0 credit internship courses for the ones that are not part of academic experiences or not embedded. And others are thinking about other ways to capture those experiences that are not already part of the student experience. So thinking about how you can make sure that you're keeping an eye on this to find out what your particular gaps are. Nichole shared some of the data we have and the gaps that we're seeing in our national data set, but there's more. And
Sorry,
then the
you said
last,
my name and I switched it.
oh gosh, it's okay. And then the last one is related to the third one, which is actually having some kind of dashboard to sort of be able to visualize this progress and visualize the gaps or challenges that might be there. So there are institutions and systems that have created that sort of dashboard. I'm seeing Robin's question in the chat already. Thank you, Robin. Appoint a senior leader. I think what the example that you'll see on the next slide, now we can go, Nichole, to the next slide, and something that we're seeing people do is really have this position be someone who's on the cabinet who reports directly to the president. And it does not have to be, as the example you're seeing here, someone who is a named new position, but someone who is at that senior level of authority to be able to collaborate at the highest level to make sure that this goal is something that is met. So at the SUNY system, Chancellor King has a goal for the whole system that every undergraduate student has an internship or other experiential learning experience before they finish their degree. And in 2024, SUNY appointed a vice chancellor for workforce development and upward mobility. And that person has a responsibility for making sure that that goal is met. And so we're seeing that be a thing that people are working toward, is either elevating a position, assigning a position, creating a position that would be accountable to this if it's an institution-wide or system-wide goal. And then on the tracking part, a very interesting thing in dialogue with some folks at the University of Mary Washington, one thing they're doing is inside their course registration process, semester by semester, they are adding questions about participation in work-based learning to that process, so that semester by semester, they have an understanding of which students have participated in work-based learning and which ones have not. And it gives them a great sense of the entire student body in understanding where they are toward tracking on that goal, which also gives them the opportunity to create an intervention or a program for the students who have not yet done it. So quite an interesting thing to think about. A lot of those experiences that, again, are not part of the regular curriculum, the normal process, but that may be captured in other ways outside of that. So some questions for reflection on this is just to get folks thinking about this. And you can answer other questions that I did not put on the slide either, but where does data for work-based learning live at your institution? Sort of getting the lay of the landscape there. And then what other gaps in infrastructure in your mind, do you think need to be closed in order to make progress on work-based learning? And I'll go back to the first question here in saying that the information is a form of infrastructure that is important for institutions to build as we think about making progress from somewhere to somewhere else. So would love to hear from folks in the chat, or I understand there's the way to raise hand and make a comment. Please feel free to do either one, and we'll take some minutes to just have a little bit of discussion, or even share your best practice on this. Would love to hear. Okay, I'm seeing some. I'm going to elevate some of the voices here. John says, we just revised our definitions around work-based learning so we can improve tracking through academic scheduling. It was a bit of a fight, actually, to your point about getting the definitions right. John, yes, that is something that I think we hear a lot is the difficulty in getting the definitions right. There's a lot of stakeholders who need to be involved in it. As you saw, work-based learning, even in the way that we've tracked it, at Strada, it takes place differently and is called different things across different disciplines. So that means getting that common definition so you're all aligned on something is, needs work for sure. Robin saying the data only live within departments where this is integrated into academic programs. Yeah, absolutely. So then it becomes interesting to think about organization wide. How do we track this? How do we make sure that we have a handle on where it all is? Is there value in referring to this as work-based learning as opposed to experiential learning? That's a great question, Joshua. I think that really would align and depend on some of the things that how your institution thinks about this. In the context of Strada, and I'll invite Nichole also to comment on this, we're thinking a lot about this as the connection from education to opportunity and to work. And so the idea that we're deliberately calling this work-based learning is centering that idea that we're trying to connect these students to great careers and outcomes and great jobs. Jobs that require a college degree, jobs that are high quality and earn them a great
Okay,
living.
yeah.
Oh,
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Deborah. Oh, never mind. Please continue.
No? Okay. All right. Well, please feel free to interrupt. So I think for us calling it work-based learning, we're saying that it with something deliberate, in mind about the connection to opportunity and connection to work. But certainly work-based learning might fall into a spectrum of other activities that fall under the broader heading of experiential learning, of which we know there's significant value to. Okay, I'm losing myself in the chat a little bit, but there are some great comments here. Loving them. Handshake might have an upcoming internal internship dashboard so they can see more data. I love that, Carly. Would love to hear more about that from Handshake, what they're doing on capturing internship data. And Louise started with the undergraduate research office and launched a dashboard tool. Lots more work to do. Yep. But it's great that you started somewhere, Louise, and have sort of a data set that you can turn into a dashboard. So many great things could come from that effort and that work. And the undergraduate research office is a significant office in capturing this kind of experience for students. So really great that you're involved in it and taking the reins of some leadership. Nichole and Julie, did I miss anything? I'm sorry if I missed anything for anybody in the chat.
There was a little comment about, are the work-based learning questions during registration directed at the department/instructor level? I think they're directed at the student, right?
Yes, that is my understanding of the University of Mary Washington, is that it's actually, as students are registering for courses for the next semester, part of that registration process that they need to complete is a question or set of questions about participation in work-based learning. So it is actually at the student level. Yes. Thanks, Nichole.
Mhm.
Okay, well, loving this. Thank you all for sharing great things. This is always helpful and fun for us. And so maybe we'll go on to the next set of practices, but I encourage folks to continue reflecting on that, adding things to the chat or raising hand to chime in as you might want. Another sort of set of practices that we're seeing institutions do to scale work-based learning is activating the allies across a network of people, both within their institution and outside, to make sure that there's both a sense of increased supply as well as keeping quality at the center of the experiences themselves. So the first thing I sort of categorize and group together is mobilizing a lot of internal and external champions to support work-based learning. So at many institutions, there are things like career champions networks, career influencer networks. That would be an example of people mobilizing internal allies, people who can help with data collection, help with understanding of which types of work-based learning fit most within the curriculum or within the experience that students are having. Or how maybe to scaffold work-based learning to go from project-based learning to something, as you know, Nichole mentioned, maybe more industry immersive or more intense. Thinking about who on your campus is going to need to be involved is quite significant, but important to do. And then also, folks are partnering with intermediaries and organizations outside of their institution who can help with brokering connections to employers, sort of selling employers on why a work-based learning experience or starting an internship would be important and effective, so that we can create those slots, those opportunities for students to fill into. So a lot of times intermediaries, and you could think of folks like state chambers and nonprofit groups that do this work. They can be very supportive in advancing this and scaling it. The second way folks are activating allies is thinking about employer partnerships and how to coordinate those even more broadly. So obviously, in the context of work-based learning, we will need employers to offer experiences and to be ready to receive students and be part of that learning journey. So a lot of institutions are taking stock of their broad employer partnership or employer relations strategy. Of course, inside the career services operations, there's lots of employer activity to be thinking about. I came from a career services background myself, so I have to shout out to our people and that great work that's being done. There's also lots of incredible employer relationships that happen in individual departments with faculty on research projects, with your fundraising or advancement teams have connections with alumni who could be employers. So really taking an expansive view of how do we interact with employers and interface with them, and where might there be opportunities to ask or inquire or partner more on work-based learning more broadly. And then lastly, is that really that check on quality, as well as thinking about how could we upskill supervisors of work-based learning experiences to help them be quality mentors. We know from some of the research, particularly out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, that one of the greatest qualities that impacts the experience of work-based learning and internships is really great supervision. So thinking about how might we encourage employers or offer resources to employers on how they can be great supervisors to interns, or even thinking about our faculty or graduate students who are supervisors and mentors to our paid undergraduate researchers. How can we help them be great mentors and guides to undergraduate students who are experiencing that kind of work, maybe for the first time? So ensuring that there's great supervision, can take a lot of different forms. And if you go to the next slide, Nichole, just have a couple examples here. NC State University has really have enjoyed, I've dove all the way headfirst into this website. They have this wonderful resource called Prime the Pack, where they are developing resources and training and materials for faculty and for graduate students who are those supervisors of undergraduate researchers, so that they can help them become great quality mentors to undergraduates in those experiences. And I thought I'd call out one potential intermediary as an example of one. There's one in Philadelphia, the greater Philadelphia area, called Campus Philly, and they have 19 institutional partners for whom they help do many things. Think a lot about how, Kristen Gallows here from Temple. Hey, Kristen. Yes, Campus Philly, a wonderful intermediary in the Philadelphia area. I come from Philadelphia, so a little bit of pride there. But they do a lot to help undergraduate students across the region think about how good it is, how wonderful it is to both live in Philadelphia and to work in Philadelphia. And they do a lot of work around the region, connecting employers and activating them to sort of build additional marketplaces for internships for students all over the Philadelphia region. So they can be a nice extension of the Philadelphia region partners in offering opportunity, helping generate opportunity. And this is just one example of how an intermediary can strengthen efforts of institutions and be an extension of their resources in their communities. So a pause here again for some discussion questions. Time for us to learn together, for Nichole and I to learn from you and to hear what you think. But sometimes when I've shared this information about thinking about supervisors, it's spawned for folks to think about wow, I didn't realize or didn't think about faculty or graduate students or didn't think about the supervision of folks in work-based learning. So thinking about who are those supervisors first, getting that landscape, which then may lead to how might we support them to make these experiences great. And then thinking about wherever you are in your institution, in your division, your department, your office, you may have connections with employers. Who else across your institution may have employer partnerships? Again, not because you need to do anything about it tomorrow, but maybe because those could be folks to partner with or talk with or think differently about how might we approach those employers to ask about more opportunities for students. So I'll pause there. I did see some things go in the chat. I shouted Kristen Gallo. Sorry, Kristen. Hi, Kevin. Okay, great. You didn't hate that. That's good. But I'm going to look at the rest of the chat here and would love for folks to raise hands, chat more. And Nichole, Julia, if you're seeing something that I should certainly point my eyes to, please interrupt.
Yeah, I see the example of dashboards at University of Central Florida. I know SUNY has some public dashboards as well that have been a neat thing that we've been able to share with folks.
Yeah, I'm seeing Louise looks very popular with her dashboard. A lot of people wanting to chat about that more. Thank you, Kimberly, for sharing your email address as well at UCF about your dashboard too.
And then Montclair also had an example of a student worker supervisor course.
Yes. Maybe Jessica, could you either in the chat, if you feel most comfortable doing that, you can share it and take your time, or come off mute if you want to just tell us more about that. Okay, Gina, any suggestions back? Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. I just
No.
didn't hear if you had called on me. Yeah, my name is Gina Burrington. I'm coming from the University of Minnesota. Just as I'm reflecting on this, one of the barriers that we sometimes have is faculty seeing themselves being able to have valuable contributions to these conversations about work-based learning because of their own personal experiences and lived experiences in academia. They have at a research institution, I've heard comments of like, that's not really a part of the work that I do, and I can't help students with their career or or work-based learning, and just don't see themselves as a partner in that work. And so just wondering if anyone has experienced any barriers like that and any ways to kind of help faculty see themselves as an important part of this work.
Thank you so much for voicing that, Gina. Really important to think about what are the points of friction in this. And I'll certainly invite folks in the chat to, or anyone to come off mute. I can't see who's coming off mute, so I'm so sorry if I'm talking over anyone. But feel free to come off mute or put in chat some of your thoughts on that point of friction with faculty.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yay. Microphone's working. So at Montclair, we started a student employee course for any student workers on campus, and we call it Work. It means something. The leader of my area, who's responsible for it, knows what it means. And we just opened today, the employer of student worker course that helps employers understand. But one of the things that we're doing now is in our employer relations work, we're trying to work with employers and give them some of the similar training, even on site. You're working with our students as your interns. Let us come to you, give us a half day. We'll talk to you a little bit about why it's important that our students are learning as they're working in your environment. And these are some of the goals that we've set for them. What are your goals? And then we kind of work through some of that. And someone mentioned in the chat that their team is small and it's hard. Our team is also very small. There are 4 people total who are doing this for the university. Of course, there are partners across the different colleges and schools, but the centralized work on student engagement is just with those 4 people. So please feel free to reach out to me if you're curious about doing it on a shoestring.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm glad your microphone worked. That is great. Terrific. Oh, Matthew, you're tipping your hat to something you're going to see because I'm talking about Iowa Grow a little bit too. That's great. Um, to go back to Gina's point of friction, I'll just mention one thing that I'm hearing from partners about working with faculty. Um, and this is certainly dependent on every individual person and, faculty members, your ability to engage them and talk with them and, how you're hearing about their feedback on being concerned about, if that's part of their job, or not part of their job to help students get jobs. I think when folks are engaging faculty in that conversation, one thing I'm hearing is them say, when we kind of dive a little deeper into that question, there can feel some sense potentially of insecurity in that faculty member just having not really knowing how to navigate that, and that's where that friction comes from is they don't know what to do in that situation. So it feels overwhelming to say basically like, we're going to put you in charge of work-based learning now, or we're going to put you in charge of getting a student a job. And that is certainly not what probably you would be saying, Gina, to them, but it is maybe how they are hearing it or receiving it. And so having a conversation to break down, it actually doesn't need to be that big, right? Like you're probably doing a lot of these super good supervisory practice things already when you're working with students. And so it may be sort of helping break down the things that they're already doing that are really advancing this, of which there are likely many. And then that can be the bridge to start a further conversation about, advancing work-based learning if that feels like there's an appetite, among that person in that conversation to do it. But there's so much that faculty do already. And so it could be let's not think about what we're adding to your plate. Let's just think about what you're already doing and how do we elevate that? How do we advance that? How do we celebrate you for that? Which then, hopefully more good comes, from that. We build the momentum. Okay, so let's go on to the next set of practices just for now, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. This is the last set of practices together, and that is sort of this idea of creating pathways for students in many different ways, really showing them the path in some cases as well. So the first practice, you actually saw some of the evidence that would go into this one that Nichole was able to share from our analysis of the data from the State Opportunity Index, which is the idea that we can, if we can, provide more quality coaching and support and guidance to students, there does seem to be a connection between that and work-based learning participation. So thinking about embedding that career guidance early is very important. Because work-based learning experiences are happening even before graduation. So it's not something to wait for, but something to proactively embed. And certainly for students who come from first-generation backgrounds, as many of you, I would imagine, have an understanding of, they may be navigating what sometimes is called the hidden curriculum of college and of career and not having many guides for that. So to provide career guidance to every student helps level that playing field and make sure it illuminates that path a little bit more clearly for people to say, here are the types of things you want to do. You want to think about building a network. You want to think about having a resume. You want to think about going on to Handshake or whatever your portal is, for opportunities on your campus. So helping them see those steps can certainly be a huge game changer. The second that we're seeing a lot of students do is, I called it for now, barrier removal funds. So there are barriers to students participating in work-based learning, sometimes even paid ones, because, to transportation to and from that internship site, or they need to get housing in the area where the internship is, and it might not be close to where they live or to your campus, or even sometimes professional attire or scrubs for your nursing students. So having funds or resources to support students in whatever maybe that last mile sort of quote unquote could be, to make sure that when they secure the position, there's less in their way to actually saying yes and feeling confident about pursuing it. So there's lots of institutions who are thinking about how they establish those kinds of funds to help that happen. And then the last, optimizing on-campus jobs. Many of you talk about that, which is wonderful that that's happening. Those are jobs that already exist. We're already funding them on our campuses. So, and certainly I know Federal Work Study is one large source of funds that supports on-campus jobs, not exclusively, but really thinking about how that can be maximized on campus. And there is authority federally in Federal Work Study that can be used for job location and development to help students and use the funding to get jobs off campus. that is quite a significant process. So it's not simple to do to sort of clear all the checks and balances on it, but it is an option and something to explore if you do have the capacity within your team to explore it. So we'll look at some examples very briefly of what people are doing on this. I'll highlight Westchester University has one of those funds. For them, it is called the Fund for Unpaid Internships. And what is a little bit unique about their approach is that the funds can either be wage stipends or scholarships. One thing that we are noticing, and I experienced myself prior to joining Strada, is that there are some times where giving students funds for their work-based learning experience can sometimes impact their financial aid. So it is important to think about that as part of when you give them funds, which is, Westchester's thinking about this in terms of scholarships, if it's connected to academic credit, or funds directly. But it is important to think about navigating this carefully with your financial aid office to make sure there's not an over-awarding or something that might impact their financial aid. And then there was already a shout out to Iowa Grow. Thank you, Matthew, for highlighting them. I am too. They've done really great work for a number of years on making on-campus jobs really an elevated experience. And they have actually some wonderful research on their website about some of the impacts of the way that they've structured their program. And it has been shown to enhance skill development in the way that they've structured supervisor conversations with student employees. So, and there are wonderful efforts on campus jobs. Work Plus at Arizona State. Sorry, Kristen, I know at Temple they've had an on-campus internship program. So has Clemson for a long time. So there's lots of institutions doing wonderful work in this area. Strongly encourage you all to explore more about that and even see, again, on the Iowa website, some of the evidence for the practice and how it's supported student growth. So those are just a few ways to think about creating the pathways, illuminating the pathways, and expanding the pathways. So my few questions for you for reflection, although these are just starters, is just thinking about when do students receive career guidance at your institution? When does that start? Do you know? When that starts might be a question. And who are partners at your institution to engage in conversation about the financial barriers? If you have an office that supports first-gen students or low-income students, for example, that might be a great place to start with talking about financial barriers. It certainly should involve and could involve your financial aid colleagues, but there are other offices who may know things about what the barriers are for students in terms of establishing that barrier removal fund and thinking about how to deploy that well. So I'll pause here. I did see some things happen in the chat that I missed, and I would love for folks to elevate that or again, come off mute, talk about these questions or others.
Kevin, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I actually want to circle back to the question that Gabriella Lever asked earlier about first-gen students and how the participation in work-based learning could be impacted by their expectations with family, because we're using this language of barriers, and I don't see that as a barrier. It prevents them from participating, maybe. I think Gabriella is right about that, and I encourage Gabriella to, if she's still here, to unmute and speak as well. But
right.
Impact participation, but it's not a barrier, right? Like it's important to them. So how do we think about that type of thing as well?
Yeah. Well, I love that you're naming that, and thank you for elevating that. It might not be a barrier, but more of it's part of life, right? Part of life for those students and those learners. This is where it gets really important to think about. Oh.
So I want to add a comment there. You're right, Julia. I don't think of it as a barrier in the way that we're discussing barriers, but it certainly could be a factor in affecting the numbers that you were reporting, because part of it could be a lack of information about the programs and the opportunities for the families, because if you've got first generation families, then they're not going to realize that those opportunities are out there as easily as families who are experienced with the higher education system. But they might also be less likely possibly to encourage that if first generation families have an expectation for students to for their kids to be helping out with the family at home when they're not actively in school. And while that's not a barrier, I think it is an area where when higher education institutions communicate about these opportunities, they also need to think about the communication to the families, right? Just not only to the students, but to those that are part of their entire decision-making process.
Mm, I love that. Such a wonderful and important comment to make. Thank you. I don't know if I could say it much better. So I think it's important to name this as, not a barrier, but to think about it as these are the ways that people are living, right? And what's important to them, what's valuable to them, what's valuable to their families. So important to think about who's in that network, who's supporting them, what information do people have. So super important. I welcome others to voice or talk about this as well, but thank you. Okay, Michelle is saying at GSU, students are introduced to our Career Center and Career Guidance generally in our 1 credit freshman orientation course. I think that's credit, CH. That's wonderful. Thank you, Michelle.
Have one in the Q&A, Deborah Santiago, as well. Are you able to see that one?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, when looking into the survey data and participation, is there disaggregated data by race ethnicity?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And yeah, we didn't present that, but we have it, and it's actually, if you go to our state opportunity index, which Kevin had it in the chat, and we can put it in the chat again. Right now, a lot of the disaggregation are in the appendices simply because it's already quite a long report. But yes, we definitely look at all of that intersectionality in terms of race and gender, ethnicity. And a lot of it is findings that you wouldn't be maybe too surprised about, that it tends to be particularly, I think, our Black and Native American students who tend to have the lowest rates of participation. So we do see some differences across that. And some of that is also, it's all, you also see different rates of participating in certain majors, across race and ethnicity, just like you do across gender. So there's some kind of, there's multiple dynamics at work there.
And I did just put a link to.
Thank you.
It's all sure. It's all the appendices from everything across the State Opportunity Index and work-based learning is in there too.
Yep.
I love seeing a lot of love in this chat from folks. That's great. Thank you for that. And some folks saying Matthew said this has been affirming, and another adjective I forget. So I'm glad. Thank you. We're glad. But that sort of wraps it up from our perspective on some of the specific, practices. So I'm just welcoming and inviting other folks to share other questions. Lots of links being shared about great practices people are doing, which is wonderful. Please do that. But invite others to pose other questions in the chat, or come off mute and ask us other questions or comment on other things besides what we've named here.
Yes, so Jason is asking about the connections between NIST and the State Opportunity Index. So we actually had, for this project, it was not just Strada, it was not just me, it was a large group of strategic and technical advisors, Tim being one of them. So, and then on each of the different areas of focus in the State Opportunity Index, we had a small group who are, kind of have expertise in that. So trying to remember for coaching, it was Tim from NIST, it was Pascal Charlot from Aspen Institute College Excellence Program. I'm gonna forget everyone who is on there. In work-based learning, we had folks from institutions, from William and Mary, from Apprenticeships for America. So it was kind of a broad and diverse group who advised us on the specific, areas of each part of the project. And then their institutions also, one thing I didn't get into too much. So there are ways, there's different ways that we collect this survey data. One is a broad panel, but another is a way for institutions to participate directly. So I know Tim put out an invitation for NIST institutions, but it's really any public institution is welcome, and Strada covers the cost of participation as a philanthropy. So if anyone is interested in getting the, participating in the survey, getting these results for your campus in particular, we would definitely welcome your participation. And this is the current sign-up period. It's kicking off fielding from March through June. There's different windows that you can participate. So if that's of interest, definitely follow up with me, and I would love to talk with you about it.
One thing I'll just elevate now that I'm scrolling back through the chat is Shelley Reed said something about Centers for Teaching and Learning as folks who can help with outreach. Just it points to the range of people, right, who on your campus can be involved as allies in this work. So thank you, Shelley, for elevating another great one, Centers for Teaching and Learning.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes left.
Nichole and I are very good at holding silence, but we're still here, I promise.
In the silence. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous, which I think means that folks are signing off to go to their next meeting. So I just want to thank so much, Nichole and Kevin. Thank you for being here and sharing your data and sharing your research with us. And thanks to everyone who joined the call today. Great town hall. Like I said, we're going to have an announcement soon about some new communities that we're launching around high impact practices and world readiness, which will incorporate things like work-based learning and project-based learning as part of their charge. So stay tuned for more information about that. If you don't mind, if you sharing your contact information so that folks can get in touch with you with questions, that would be wonderful. But we're looking forward to the publication of the new data that you shared on this call. So thanks for giving us a sneak peek. Thanks, everyone.